Hello, 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 hello. Parang kwangya. Hello, 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 mic test. Okay, hello, good evening, everyone. I'm sorry this took a long time now. I was supposed to be starting with this last night, pero girl things. My period started today, and I spent last night sleeping like this on my table sa aking apartment. And I even left both my doors doon sa tinitirahan kong apartment open. Tapos nagising na lang ako alauna ng madaling araw na open pala lahat ng pintuan ko at ako ay nakatulog. Feeling I was still terribly sick even until the morning, but I went on and made my output for masters first because actually late na ako ng isang araw nun, so I had to do that. And now I'm here. I am here in Jensen, struggling. God, but I'm alive and I'm here on my place here in General Santos. So, okay, let's start discussing. We are done with the discussion of Chapter 5, the nature of second language acquisition. We have SLA, bilingualism, and of course, code switching. I will also be posting the video of that in your Open LMS classroom. And of course, now we will proceed with Chapter 6, the last chapter for final period in ELT 1. So we, on my other classes, we are done with the discussion of chapters 1 and 2, GTM and direct method, but I'm still going to repeat it here for the sake of my other classes who are not yet able to be acquainted with the lessons, okay? There are several teaching methods that language teachers can choose from. According to many experts, there are 5 main methods that have a strong influence on the way English is taught, and these include first, grammar translation method or GTM. We also have direct method, audiolingualism, communicative language teaching, and of course, task-based learning. Now, GTM, direct method, audiolingualism, and task-based learning, it is included here in one PDF, but CLT is on another PDF or another document because it's quite long. And frankly, this is my own opinion that you may have different opinion, you might have different opinions, though. But I think among these 5 methods or approaches, I think CLT is the strongest. You'll learn why later on. Okay, let's start with chapter 1, grammar translation method. Now, GTM is largely based on the classical method, the way individuals studied classical languages like Greek and Latin. The grammar translation method was developed in the 18th century. So, basically speaking, this is a very old approach now in ELT, a traditional approach. So, I don't advise using it frequently. Okay, you can still use it. Okay, that's the same. You can still use it, but when you are going to use a traditional approach, make sure that you incorporate or combine it with a contemporary or modern approach. Okay, para you can assure that there is effectivity in teaching the language. Okay, so this was developed in the 18th century as a way of teaching modern languages to young learners. I think when we were in elementary, this is how we were taught the English language. That's why most of people in our generation, when you test them and their capacities, aptitude when it comes to the English language, they're good, written exam. Pero when you let them speak using the English language, talagang kulang. Some of us are not really confident. Okay. So what are the main features of grammar translation method? First, the following here are the main features of grammar translation method as adapted from the work of Praetor and Celce Murcia. That's in 1979. First is that classes in GTM or grammar translation method are taught in L1. That's why it's called translation method, because language is first taught using your L1 or your first language, which is when you think about it, it's a good approach because it's important to incorporate their first language in learning their second language, according to Rene Descartes, right? And also according to behaviorism, there is really a need to use the knowledge that they have in L1 to teach their L2 or their target language. Now, in GTM, of course, there is a long list of isolated words to be learned and memorized. Remember, in grammar translation method, rote memorization is the key. Memorize, memorize, memorize. You memorize this word, the English translation of this word, and what does it mean. That's why when you apply GTM, there is really a need to use dictionaries, Filipino English, English to Filipino dictionaries. It also in GTM, little or no attention is given to the development of speaking and listening skills rather, because we focus more on memorization. So mostly it's just reading and writing. No? That's why now, as I previously mentioned, when you assess a student who is used to learning the English language using GTM, they're good at writing. They're good at written tests. You know, objective, multiplication, fill in the blanks, etc. They're good at that because they're good at memorizing. But when you actually apply the usage of the English language, they fell short. Now, grammar rules are explained lengthily in and elaborately, especially word endings and word formation in grammar translation method. So there is really a need to explain everything. You know, in grammar translation method, you start with phonology, the sounds, then you proceed with morphology. Now you proceed with 8 parts of speech, the rules of grammar, verb tenses, all of that. Then it needs to be memorized because that's how you are going to be assessed or evaluated through written examinations. There now in GTM, emphasis on learning is about the language. There is an emphasis on learning about the language rather than how to use the language. Because excuse me, when we say there is an emphasis on how to use the language, that is CLT or communicative language teaching, but we'll discuss more about that. So GTM focuses on learning about the language. We're learning about the rules of language, not the application, only the theoretical knowledge. Okay. Now, what are the advantages of GTM? Although I've mentioned that it's a traditional approach, it's from a long time ago, it's not really that applicable at this generation, but still there are advantages when you want to use GTM. First, teachers are becoming aware of grammar rules because the more that you teach, diba? The more you teach about the rules of grammar, the more that you master it. And as also we when you are going to use GTM, the requirement is that the teacher has mastery or awareness of grammar rules. Next, the translation of words and phrases from the target language into the learner's first language enable the learning of some types of vocabulary and some grammatical structures. Di ba when we were differentiating language acquisition from language learning, we learned that language acquisition, the area of the brain involved is Broca's area. Tapos pag language learning naman, it's Wernicke's area. We know that Broca's area is the word production center of the brain, and Wernicke's area is the word recognition center of the brain. So from that aspect, scientifically, there really is a need for you to anchor your L1 when you teach the target language or the L2. So in some ways, or even in most ways, GTM is very helpful because they get to also understand that, oh, okay, so this is the grammar structure of my L1. It's a little bit different for the structure of my L2. And then they see the differences and the similarities. And they can apply their vocabulary and syntactic skills from their L1, from how they acquired their L1. Next, learning grammar, reading, vocabulary, and translation skills enables students to pass they pass mandatory written tests in the secondary or tertiary level. There's a need naman for you, di ba, to pass mandatory written tests like national achievement tests. So in that sense, you're guided. I mean, you're good to go if ganun lang nga yung way of assessment. Pero unfortunately, it's not the only way that you're going to be assessed. So dyan tayo magkakatalo. That's why it also has its disadvantages. Now, the disadvantages of GTM, long and elaborate explanations of grammar may bore some students. It's not really effective if you just stand there and discuss about the rules of grammar and then let them listen and memorize or take notes and all of that. See, that's boring. Let's be honest. Even now in this generation, that our attention span is very short. I don't think that will work all of the time. Okay, I'm not saying that it's not going to work at all. Okay, it's just that it's not going to work most of the time. There are also emphasis on grammar accuracy and memorization of a great number of isolated words, which may demotivate some students. Even me, if you ask me that, okay, in order for you to pass this subject, you have to memorize all of these. No, ma'am, I don't want to do that because that's boring. Okay, and that's going to demotivate me. So at least you must include activities that will, um, ignite interaction with the students. Also, another disadvantage is that accurate translation of a word or structure is not always possible because there are words in a learner's first language that doesn't have any English equivalents. Okay, so not possible all the time, GTM. Now, what are the techniques to remember? Techniques that you can apply inside the classroom when you're using GTM. Now, the grammar translation method is still in use in some parts of the world, even here in the Philippines. Diane Larson Freeman, in her books Techniques and Principles in Language Teaching, discusses typical techniques closely associated with this method. So the following is a summary of these techniques. First, translating target language to a new language, finding information in a passage, making inferences and relating to personal experience. So first one tayo, translating target language to a new language. So we use techniques like unsay Bisayaan unsay English aning gatas, milk. Okay, so there is the connection of L1 and L2. So translation is very much prevalent in GTM. Next, finding information in a passage. So you let them read the story, and then let them make inferences. What have you learned? What is the lesson? What's the theme, etc. And relate. And you can also use it to relate personal experiences. Like if you were Romeo, if you were Juliet, what would you do in the story, etc. So those are GTM. You're using GTM in that aspect. Next, finding antonyms and synonyms for words or set of words. Also very important. Kasi nga, di ba, you are in the process naman of memorizing vocabulary. So and inevitably, you will also encounter their antonyms and synonyms. So you ask them in one way of learning the translations of some words, you use their antonyms. So yeah, our new word for today is flabbergasted. The antonym for flabbergasted is calm, or the synonym of flabbergasted is surprised. So what does flabbergasted mean? So you use that. You're using GTM. You're also learning spelling or sound patterns that correspond between L1 and the target language. So you make sure that in this case, the sounds or even the spelling patterns, you use their L1 so that you have to apply their L1 and then you apply that to your target language. That's why it becomes a disadvantage because there's no always like accurate translation of spellings and sound patterns. Because for example, walang sound ng F sa what do you call this in the Filipino language. So it might be a bit difficult in that part. But I was given to understand that even though it doesn't exist in the the sound F or the letter F does not exist in the general Filipino language, but in some languages in the Philippines, it exists, like in Blaan, because you have few flafos. So meaning there are some languages in the Filipino language, or in the Philippines, that has the sound F. I learned about that last Saturday. Now, also using filling in gaps in sentences with new words or items of a particular grammar type. You're very familiar with this, diba? This is how we learned. This is how we are evaluated or assessed before. Fill in the blanks. Okay, the children, blank. Ang clue mo ay is or are playing in the ground. So ano ang tama dyan? Ano ilagay mo sa blank, sa gaps? So that's how it is. You use GTM in that aspect. Though, of course, we also have memorizing vocabulary lists, memorize rules and even grammatical paradigms. You can also create sentences to illustrate the meaning of new words, and of course, writing about the topic using the target language. So that is GTM, or grammar translation method. Up next, we are going to discuss about direct method.